Have you ever wondered what happens to the belongings of those who vanish without a trace? Those precious items, family heirlooms, and valuable possessions that once defined a person's existence, suddenly left without an owner? In the darkest corners of American history, there are stories of those who profited from such misfortune. But what if I told you that sometimes those who find what is lost are the very ones who caused it to disappear in the first place? Before you continue watching this video, tell us in the comments where you're from. And if this kind of hidden American history intrigues you, please subscribe to help our channel continue bringing these forgotten horrors to light. In the autumn of 1889, the small town of Holleridge, Missouri, became the setting for one of the most disturbing cases of deception and manipulation ever documented in the state's history. The case would later be referred to in hushed tones as the Holleridge Auction Murders, though for decades many of the details remained sealed in county records, deemed too disturbing for public knowledge. Holleridge was a prosperous mining town situated in the rolling hills of southern Missouri. With a population of just under 3,000 people, it had grown significantly during the previous 2 decades due to the discovery of lead deposits in the surrounding countryside. The town boasted a central square with a handsome courthouse, several churches, a school, and numerous businesses, including a hotel, 3 saloons, and various shops catering to the needs of the townsfolk and the miners who worked the hills. Among the more recent additions to Holleridge's business district was Pendleton Sisters Auctioneering and Estate Liquidation, established in 1887 by twin sisters Eliza and Eleanor Pendleton. The twins had arrived in Holleridge from St. Louis following the death of their father, a once respected auctioneer whose business had failed after a series of scandals involving questionable provenance of certain valuable items that had passed through his auction house. The Pendleton sisters were identical in appearance. Both possessed striking features with pale blue eyes, high cheekbones, and dark chestnut hair that they wore in elaborate updos. At 27 years of age, they were unmarried, which was somewhat unusual for women of their era, but the townspeople attributed this to their dedication to their business and their seemingly unbreakable bond with each other. Sheriff Thomas Blackwood would later recall in his official statement, "Those women were inseparable. You never saw one without the other close by. They spoke in that way twins sometimes do, finishing each other's sentences and such. They had a way of looking at you that made you feel they knew something about you that you didn't know yourself." The auction house operated from a converted barn on the edge of town. The sisters had renovated the structure with surprising efficiency, transforming the rustic building into an elegant space with polished wooden floors, whitewashed walls, and large windows that allowed natural light to illuminate the treasures within. Every Friday afternoon, the Pendleton sisters would hold an auction, selling everything from household furniture and farming equipment to more valuable items like jewelry, silverware, and occasional rarities that attracted buyers from neighboring towns and even as far as St. Louis. What made the Pendleton sisters' business unique was their specialty in what they referred to as lost property recovery. According to their business advertisements in the local paper, the Holleridge Herald, the sisters possessed a remarkable talent for locating lost or misplaced valuables and returning them to circulation for the benefit of the community. Martha Jenkins, the elderly owner of the town's haberdashery, gave the following account to investigators. At first, everyone thought it was almost miraculous. Mrs. Abernathy had been lamenting the disappearance of her grandmother's silver tea service for months. She had searched her home dozens of times, enlisted the help of her household staff, even accused her maid of theft. Then the Pendleton girls announced they had recovered a silver tea service that matched the description exactly. They claimed it had been found abandoned in an old storage space behind the livery. Mrs. Abernathy was overjoyed, But when she went to claim it, the sisters regretfully informed her that as it was abandoned property, it would need to be auctioned according to town ordinances. Of course, she could bid on it like anyone else. This pattern repeated itself with alarming frequency. A valued possession would go missing, sometimes jewelry, sometimes furniture, sometimes documents of importance, and weeks or months later, the item would mysteriously appear in the inventory of the Pendleton sisters' auction house. The original owners were always given the opportunity to purchase back their possessions, but often at prices far exceeding their actual value, driven up by what some began to suspect was artificial bidding. Dr. William Hayes, the town physician, noted in his personal journal, which was later submitted as evidence, "I find it most peculiar that Eleanor Pendleton was present at the Fitzgerald home the very day before Mrs. Fitzgerald's prized porcelain figurine collection vanished. She had called to deliver a package for Mr. Fitzgerald and was, by the housekeeper's account, left unattended in the parlour, where the collection was displayed for approximately 15 minutes. 3 weeks later, those exact figurines appeared at the Pendleton auction, described as recovered from an abandoned property outside of town. The coincidence strains credulity. As 1889 progressed, the disappearances of valuables throughout Holleridge increased at an alarming rate. Silverware, jewelry, family Bibles containing important records, land deeds, watches, and even smaller furniture pieces vanished from locked homes, often with no signs of forced entry. In each case, the items would eventually surface at the Pendleton auction house, described as recovered or found property that, according to town regulations, needed to be sold to the highest bidder. What made the situation even more disturbing was that the missing items were frequently those with significant emotional or practical value to their owners. It wasn't just about the monetary worth, but the personal connection or essential nature of the stolen goods. Land deeds, marriage certificates, family heirlooms passed down through generations. These were the types of items that kept appearing in the Pendleton sisters' inventory. Reverend Jonathan Miller of the First Baptist Church of Holleridge wrote in a letter to his brother in Kansas City, "There is something deeply unsettling about those women. After Mrs. Wilson's husband passed away last spring, Eleanor Pendleton called on her to offer condolences. 2 days later, Mrs. Wilson discovered that her husband's will had vanished from her desk drawer. The poor woman was beside herself with worry, as the document contained specific provisions for her care and the inheritance of their children. Without it, her husband's brother was threatening to contest her right to the family farm. Lo and behold, 3 weeks later, the Pendleton sisters announced they had recovered a box of legal documents, including several wills. Mrs. Wilson had to pay nearly $50, her entire savings, to reclaim her own husband's will at auction. The first death connected to the Pendleton sisters occurred in July of 1889. Thomas Greaves, a successful merchant whose wife's diamond necklace had recently been recovered and auctioned by the sisters, confronted Eliza and Eleanor after discovering evidence that they had been in his home uninvited shortly before the necklace disappeared. According to witness accounts, Greaves stormed into the auction house during a preview event, publicly accused the sisters of theft, and threatened to bring his evidence to Sheriff Blackwood. The following morning, Greaves was found dead in his office, apparently having consumed poisoned whiskey. The death was initially ruled a suicide, as Greaves had been despondent over his inability to recover his wife's necklace, which had been purchased at auction by a collector from Springfield. However, later evidence would cast significant doubt on this conclusion. Margaret Hollister, who worked as a cleaner at the hotel across from Greaves's store, provided a sworn statement. "I saw Miss Eleanor Pendleton leaving Mr. Greaves's store very early that morning before sunrise. She was moving quickly and kept looking over her shoulder. I thought it strange because the store wouldn't open for hours yet, and Mr. Greaves was known to arrive late, never early. As summer turned to fall, tension in Holleridge grew. More valuable items disappeared, more recovered property appeared at the Pendleton auction house, and whispers of suspicion grew louder. Yet the sisters maintained their position of respectability in the community, regularly attending church services, making donations to local charities, and continuing to expand their business with the addition of a separate showroom for particularly valuable items. In September, a second death occurred that would ultimately lead to the unraveling of the Pendleton sisters scheme. Sarah Montgomery, a widow who lived alone in a small cottage on the outskirts of town, was known to possess a valuable collection of gold coins left to her by her late husband, a former prospector who had struck a modest fortune in California years earlier. The coins were Sarah's only significant asset, and she guarded them zealously, keeping them hidden in a secret compartment beneath a floorboard in her bedroom. On September 12th, Sarah's neighbor, James Wilson, called on her after noticing that she had not collected her milk delivery from her porch for 2 days. Finding the door unlocked, Wilson entered the cottage and discovered Sarah dead in her bedroom, the floorboards pried up and the hidden compartment empty. The local doctor initially determined that Sarah had died of a heart attack, possibly brought on by the shock of discovering burglars in her home. However, a more thorough examination by Dr. Hayes revealed needle marks on Sarah's arm, concealed by the sleeve of her nightgown, suggesting she may have been injected with something before her death. By this time, Sheriff Blackwood had begun to harbor serious suspicions about the Pendleton sisters, especially after learning that Eliza Pendleton had visited Sarah just days before her death, ostensibly to deliver a church basket. Sheriff Blackwood's suspicions intensified when, predictably, a collection of gold coins matching the description of Sarah Montgomery's missing collection appeared in the inventory list for the Pendleton sisters' upcoming auction, scheduled for September 20th. The advertisement in the Holleridge Herald described them as a remarkable collection of California gold coins, recently recovered from an abandoned mining claim outside of town. Rather than confront the sisters immediately, Sheriff Blackwood decided to conduct surveillance on the auction house. For 5 nights, he and his deputy, Frank Jenkins, took turns watching the building from a concealed position in a grove of trees nearby. On the 4th night, their patience was rewarded with a disturbing discovery from Sheriff Blackwood's official report. At approximately 2:15 in the morning, September 19th, Deputy Jenkins and I observed a wagon approaching the rear of the Pendleton auction house. The wagon was driven by an individual later identified as Eleanor Pendleton, dressed in men's clothing. A second individual, identified as Eliza Pendleton, also in men's attire, rode alongside on horseback. The women proceeded to unload several trunks and crates from the wagon and carry them into the auction house through the rear entrance. Most concerning was their behavior. They worked in near-total silence, communicating through hand gestures, and repeatedly surveyed their surroundings as if concerned about being observed. The sheriff and his deputy continued their surveillance until dawn, noting that the sisters remained in the auction house until approximately 4 in the morning before departing separately, Eliza on the horse, heading north out of town, and Eleanor in the wagon, traveling east. This pattern of nocturnal activity raised further alarm, but the true horror of the situation was yet to be uncovered. The following day, September 19th, Sheriff Blackwood received an urgent message from the neighboring town of Millfield. A local farmer had discovered an abandoned cabin in the woods between Holleridge and Millfield, which appeared to have been recently occupied. Inside, the farmer had found disturbing evidence of something sinister: restraints attached to a bed frame, various bottles containing unknown substances, and most alarmingly, a journal with detailed notes about numerous residents of Holleridge, including information about their valuable possessions, daily routines, and security measures in their homes. Sheriff Blackwood, along with Millfield's Sheriff Davis, immediately rode to investigate the cabin. What they discovered there confirmed their worst fears and revealed the true extent of the Pendleton sisters' operation. From Sheriff Davis's supplementary report, The cabin appeared to have been used as some kind of base of operations. We found detailed maps of Holleridge with certain homes marked, along with notes about the occupants' schedules and valuables. There were numerous empty bottles that Dr. Hayes later confirmed had contained chloroform and various sedatives. Most disturbing were the personal effects of numerous Holleridge residents who had reported items missing: small trinkets, locks of hair, pages torn from personal journals, suggesting a level of invasion and violation beyond mere theft. The most incriminating evidence, however, was a leather-bound ledger discovered hidden beneath a loose floorboard. The ledger, written in a meticulous hand later confirmed to be Eliza Pendleton's, detailed every item the sisters had stolen, from whom it was taken, the circumstances of the theft, and the profit made when the item was recovered and sold at auction. The ledger also contained disturbing references to individuals who had interfered and been permanently silenced, including Thomas Greaves and Sarah Montgomery. A page from the recovered ledger, later entered into evidence, read, "September 10th, visited the Montgomery woman under pretense of church charity. Located the gold coins exactly where our information suggested, beneath the third floorboard from the north wall. The old woman is too suspicious and refused to leave me alone in the house, even for a moment. E will return tomorrow night with the chloroform. The coins should fetch at least $300 at auction, especially with the Richardson fellow from St. Louis attending. He has a particular interest in California gold." Another entry, dated July 15th, was even more chilling. Greaves became problematic this afternoon. His accusations, while entirely accurate, threatened everything we have built here. E administered the solution in his evening whiskey. By morning, the problem had resolved itself. The sheriff's conclusion of suicide was most convenient. Note, we must be more careful about being seen entering and exiting homes and businesses outside of normal hours. Armed with this evidence, Sheriff Blackwood planned to arrest the Pendleton sisters immediately following their auction on September 20th, hoping to catch them with Sarah Montgomery's gold coins and other stolen property in their possession. However, when he and several deputies arrived at the auction house that morning, they found the building locked and no sign of either sister. A search of the premises revealed that most of the inventory had been removed, including all of the most valuable items. The sisters' living quarters above the auction house had been similarly emptied of personal belongings. It appeared that Eliza and Eleanor Pendleton had fled, taking with them the fruits of their criminal enterprise. What followed was one of the most extensive manhunts in Missouri history at that time. Telegrams were sent to law enforcement in surrounding counties and states. Wanted posters featuring sketches of the Pendleton sisters were distributed throughout the region. Rewards were offered for information leading to their capture. Despite these efforts, the sisters seemed to have vanished as completely as the valuables they had stolen from the people of Holleridge. The breakthrough came nearly a month later, in late October, when a station master in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, reported encountering twin women matching the Pendleton sisters' description. According to his account, the women had purchased tickets to Chicago, but had engaged him in conversation about connections from Chicago to various destinations, including New York, Boston, and Montreal. This information suggested the sisters were potentially planning to flee the country entirely, perhaps to Canada or even Europe. Missouri state authorities coordinated with law enforcement in Illinois, and on November 2nd, Eliza and Eleanor Pendleton were apprehended as they attempted to board a train from Chicago to New York. In their possession were several trunks containing valuable items stolen from Holleridge residents, as well as a considerable sum of money, nearly $15,000, an enormous amount for the time, presumably the proceeds from their auction scheme. The sisters were returned to Missouri to stand trial. The case against them was overwhelming, with the recovered ledger providing detailed documentation of their crimes. In addition to theft and fraud, they were charged with the murders of Thomas Greaves and Sarah Montgomery, as well as two previously unexplained deaths in Holleridge that their ledger revealed were also their handiwork. The trial began in December of 1889 and captivated the region. Newspapers as far away as New York and San Francisco carried accounts of the murderous auction twins and their elaborate scheme. What emerged during testimony was a picture of two women of remarkable intelligence and absolutely no moral conscience, who had systematically terrorized the town of Holleridge for over 2 years. From the court transcripts, Prosecutor James Harrington's opening statement, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the case before you today is one of unprecedented calculation and malice. The Pendleton sisters did not merely steal objects of value. They stole people's connections to their past, their legal rights, their security. And when confronted with the possibility of exposure, they did not hesitate to commit murder to protect their criminal enterprise. These women preyed upon a community that welcomed them, using the trust they cultivated to perpetrate their crimes more effectively." As the trial progressed, more disturbing details emerged about the sisters' methods. They had apparently cultivated a network of informants throughout Holleridge, servants, delivery boys, laborers, whom they paid for information about valuable items in people's homes and when those homes might be unoccupied. They used disguises, including men's clothing, to move about town undetected at night. And perhaps most disturbingly, they had developed a system for identifying potential victims based on vulnerability: the elderly, widows and widowers, those without family nearby, people less likely to mount an effective response when their possessions went missing. The most chilling testimony came from Caroline Turner, a 17-year-old girl who had briefly worked for the sisters as a cleaner at the auction house. "I found a small notebook hidden behind a loose board in the office. Inside were lists of names with notes beside them: easily confused, poor memory, lives alone, no family to question. When Miss Eliza caught me looking at it, she became very angry. She told me I had misunderstood, that it was a list of customers who might need extra assistance. But the way she looked at me, I quit the next day. A week later, my mother's wedding ring disappeared from our home. It later turned up at their auction, and we couldn't afford to buy it back." Throughout the trial, the Pendleton sisters remained eerily calm and composed. They sat side by side at the defense table, dressed identically in severe black dresses, their expressions unreadable. They declined to testify in their own defense, and their court-appointed attorney presented little in the way of exculpatory evidence, instead attempting to argue that they had been driven to their crimes by the financial hardships they faced after their father's disgrace. This defense found little sympathy with the jury, which deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Judge William Hargrove sentenced Eliza and Eleanor Pendleton to death by hanging, a rare sentence for women at that time, reflecting the heinous nature of their crimes. On the morning of January 17th, 1890, the Pendleton sisters were scheduled to be executed at the Missouri State Penitentiary. However, when guards arrived at their cell to escort them to the gallows, they made a horrifying discovery. Eleanor Pendleton was dead, apparently having consumed poison smuggled into the prison by unknown means. Beside her lay Eliza, unconscious but still breathing, having consumed a smaller amount of the same substance. Eliza Pendleton was rushed to the prison infirmary, where doctors managed to save her life. When she regained consciousness and was informed of her sister's death, witnesses reported a chilling transformation. The composed, articulate woman disappeared, replaced by someone who alternated between catatonic silence and frenzied, incoherent ranting. She repeatedly claimed that she was not Eliza but Eleanor, that her sister had died in her place, and that they had switched, as they had done many times before. Dr. Malcolm Reynolds, the prison physician, noted in his report, The prisoner, now known as Eliza Pendleton, exhibits signs of severe mental disturbance following the death of her twin. She insists upon being addressed as Eleanor and reacts with violent agitation when called by her own name. More disturbing are her periods of apparent normalcy, during which she speaks with clarity about their crimes, expressing neither remorse nor concern, but rather a cold pride in what she terms their artistry. It is my professional opinion that she is attempting to evade the hangman's noose through a pretense of insanity. Whether genuine or feigned, Eliza Pendleton's apparent mental breakdown resulted in a postponement of her execution pending psychiatric evaluation. She was transferred to the State Lunatic Asylum at Fulton, where she was to be held until she was deemed mentally fit for execution. It was at the asylum that the final, most disturbing chapter of the Pendleton sisters' story unfolded. Dr. James Whitcomb, the chief physician at the facility, became fascinated by Eliza Pendleton and her claims of having switched identities with her sister. He began spending extensive time with her, recording their conversations and studying her behavior. In his private journals, later discovered after his own death, Dr. Whitcomb wrote, "I am increasingly convinced that there is something beyond conventional medical understanding at work in the case of E. Pendleton. The shifts in personality are too complete, too nuanced to be mere performance. When she speaks as Eliza, her handwriting, speech patterns, even her posture are distinctly different from when she claims to be Eleanor. Most remarkable is that each personality seems to have separate memories, with Eliza able to recall details that were unknown to Eleanor, and vice versa. I have begun to wonder if we are dealing with a case of dual consciousness, perhaps precipitated by the extreme closeness of the twin relationship." For nearly 2 years, Eliza Pendleton remained at the asylum, her execution continuously delayed as doctors debated her mental state. During this time, she demonstrated an uncanny ability to manipulate staff members, gaining privileges and freedoms not typically afforded to patients, particularly those with violent histories. She established what Dr. Whitcomb described as an unusual influence over certain orderlies and nurses who would bring her items from outside the asylum and carry messages for her. Then, on November 10th, 1892, Eliza Pendleton vanished from the asylum. The circumstances of her escape were never fully explained, though an orderly who had often attended to her was found dead in her cell, apparently strangled with a length of cloth torn from a bedsheet. Several other staff members reported having no memory of the events of that night, describing periods of lost time and confusion. A massive search was launched, but Eliza Pendleton had disappeared completely. Despite extensive efforts by law enforcement across multiple states, she was never found. The most promising lead came nearly a year later, when a woman matching her description was reported working as a governess for a wealthy family in Baltimore. But by the time investigators arrived, the woman had departed, leaving no trace of her whereabouts. Over the years, there were occasional reports of Eliza Pendleton's sightings in New Orleans, in San Francisco, even in London and Paris. Some accounts claimed she had continued her criminal activities, establishing new auction houses under different names and implementing similar schemes to the one in Holleridge. Others suggested she had used her ill-gotten gains to establish herself in legitimate business ventures. None of these reports were ever conclusively verified. Perhaps the most disturbing epilogue to the case came in 1905, more than 15 years after the events in Holleridge. Thomas Blackwood, the former sheriff who had exposed the Pendleton sisters' crimes, by then retired and living in St. Louis, received a package at his home. Inside was a small silver pocket watch that had belonged to his father, which had been stolen from Blackwood's home in 1888 and later recovered and sold by the Pendleton sisters to a buyer from Kansas City. Accompanying the watch was a note, written in the meticulous handwriting identified as Eliza Pendleton's. "My dear Sheriff, I thought it time to return this family heirloom to its rightful owner. Consider it a token of my enduring appreciation for the role you played in our little drama all those years ago. You were a worthy adversary, the only one who saw through our performance. I have often wondered, did you ever suspect there was only one of us? Eliza died when we were 15. I have been both sisters ever since. Sometimes I forget which one I'm supposed to be. With fondest regards, E. Pendleton. Blackwood immediately contacted the authorities, but extensive investigation yielded no trace of the sender. The package had been mailed from New York City with no return address, and the trail quickly went cold. Blackwood himself died 6 months later of a sudden stroke, the watch found clutched in his hand. In the decades that followed, the legend of the Pendleton sisters grew in Missouri folklore. Stories circulated about twin women seen at twilight near abandoned properties, about valuable objects disappearing and reappearing in unexpected places, about auction houses where the bidding always seemed to favor certain mysterious participants. In 1922, a small auction house opened in Joplin, Missouri, operated by an elderly woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Eleanor Finch. According to local accounts, Mrs. Finch had an uncanny ability to recover lost items and return them to circulation. She was particularly known for holding silent auctions of especially valuable pieces, events that were by invitation only and held after dark. When a local historian noted the similarities between Mrs. Finch's business practices and those of the infamous Pendleton sisters, the elderly auctioneer reportedly smiled and said, "History repeats itself, young man. Some performances are too exquisite not to encore." The following day, Mrs. Finch closed her business and disappeared, leaving behind a building empty of inventory, but filled with personal effects that seemed to belong to dozens of different individuals. Photographs, letters, small keepsakes, none of which had any apparent connection to Mrs. Finch herself. As for Holleridge, the town never fully recovered from the Pendleton sisters' reign of terror. Many of the victims, unable to reclaim their stolen property and traumatized by the violations of their homes and privacy, chose to leave the area entirely. The lead mines began to play out in the early 1900s, further diminishing the town's prosperity. By 1930, Holleridge had dwindled to little more than a ghost town, with only a handful of families remaining. Today, all that remains of Holleridge is a small cemetery and the crumbling foundation of what was once the courthouse. Local legend claims that on certain nights, particularly during the autumn months, visitors to the site can hear the sound of an auctioneer's gavel and the murmur of bidders. Some have reported seeing twin women in 19th century dress walking among the ruins, one always slightly behind the other, their faces identical and their expressions unmistakably triumphant. The most recent reported sighting came in 2015, when a family picnicking near the old Holleridge site reported being approached by an elderly woman who asked if they had lost a gold locket. When they said they hadn't, she smiled and replied, "Someone has. But don't worry, I'll make sure it finds its way back into circulation." Before they could respond, she walked away into the trees and disappeared from sight. Later, the family discovered that a cherished family photograph had vanished from their picnic blanket. Investigators have never located the gold locket mentioned by the mysterious woman, nor have they found any trace of the elderly figure herself. What they did discover, however, was a small auction house that had recently opened in a neighboring town, specializing in the recovery and circulation of lost treasures. In 2019, a team of researchers from the University of Missouri undertook an ambitious historical project to document the criminal history of the state during the late 19th century. Among the cases they studied was that of the Pendleton sisters, drawn by the unusual nature of their crimes and the persistent legends surrounding them. What they discovered in their investigation suggests that the horror of the Pendleton sisters' story runs deeper than even the most sensational newspaper accounts of the time indicated. Dr. Rachel Summers, the lead researcher on the project, gained access to previously sealed court documents, medical records from the Fulton Asylum, and private correspondence related to the case. Her findings, published in the Journal of American Criminal History, paint a disturbing picture of the true extent of the Pendleton sisters' activities and raise haunting questions about their ultimate fate. From Dr. Summers' article, "The conventional narrative of the Pendleton case focuses on their auction scheme in Holleridge, but our research indicates that Holleridge was merely the culmination of a pattern of similar operations conducted across at least 5 states over a period of approximately 12 years. Records from Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Arkansas all contain references to auction houses operated by twin women that followed the same pattern. Mysterious disappearances of valuables followed by their recovery and resale at inflated prices. In each location, the business operated for 1 to 3 years before the proprietors vanished, often coinciding with suspicious deaths in the community. One of the most significant discoveries made by Dr. Summers and her team was a collection of personal papers belonging to Dr. James Whitcomb, the asylum physician who had become fascinated by Eliza Pendleton during her incarceration. These papers, found in the attic of his former home during renovations in 2018, included detailed notes on his interactions with Pendleton that had never been made part of the official record. Whitcomb's private writings reveal a man increasingly under the influence of his patient, someone whose professional objectivity had been completely compromised. His later entries suggest that he not only believed Eliza Pendleton's claim of being both sisters simultaneously, but had begun to assist her in maintaining this deception. From Whitcomb's journal, dated May 28, 1892, E continues to demonstrate her remarkable ability to shift between her two selves. "I'm now convinced that what we are witnessing is not mental illness, but rather an extraordinary case of dual consciousness. The medical literature contains no comparable example. Today, she provided proof that has removed any lingering doubt. As Eleanor, she was able to recall and reproduce complex encryption codes that I had shared only with Eliza during sessions when she was presenting as her sister. The level of detail and accuracy would be impossible to fabricate or memorize. An entry from August 3rd of the same year is even more troubling. E has shared with me the truth of her condition, a truth so extraordinary that I hesitate to commit it to paper. She claims that following Eliza's death in childhood, she discovered she could maintain her sister's presence by becoming her at will. Over time, this ability developed to the point where the transition became seamless, unconscious. She describes it not as performance, but as genuine transformation. Her mind, her very being, shifting between 2 distinct people sharing one body. The implications for our understanding of human consciousness are staggering. The final entries in Whitcomb's journal, from the weeks preceding Eliza Pendleton's escape from the asylum, suggest that he had moved beyond professional interest to become an accomplice. He writes of smuggling items to her, of manipulating staff schedules to ensure certain attendants were assigned to her care, and of discussions about research they would conduct together once she was free. The last entry, dated November 9th, 1892, the day before Pendleton's disappearance, reads only, "All is prepared. Tomorrow, Eleanor dies and Eliza is reborn. Our great work begins." Dr. Whitcomb himself disappeared shortly after Eliza Pendleton's escape, officially listed as having resigned his position and relocated. However, no record of him practicing medicine elsewhere was ever found. Intriguingly, a physician named James Whitney established a practice in Boston in 1893, specializing in what he termed disorders of consciousness. While no photograph of Dr. Whitney exists in public records, descriptions of him note a distinctive facial scar, similar to one Dr. Whitcomb was known to have. Perhaps the most disturbing discovery made by Dr. Summers and her research team came from a previously overlooked collection of evidence from the Pendleton sisters' residence above their auction house in Hollowridge. Among the items catalogued but never thoroughly examined was a small, leather-bound book, initially assumed to be another business ledger. When finally translated, the text was written in a complex cipher that took modern cryptographers considerable effort to break. It proved to be something far more sinister. The decoded journal, believed to be written by Eliza Pendleton, contains detailed accounts of experiments the sisters had conducted on unwilling subjects, people they had apparently abducted and held captive in remote locations near the towns where they operated. These experiments focused on what the journal calls the transfer of consciousness and the housing of multiple souls within a single vessel. From the decoded journal, Subject 4 survived the procedure for nearly 6 hours, far longer than our previous attempts. The electrical stimulation to the precise points on the cranium appears to be the key factor. During this period, we observed clear evidence of consciousness transfer. She responded to Eleanor's name, recited passages only Eleanor had memorized, even reproduced Eleanor's distinctive handwriting. The effect faded as the subject weakened, but the implications are clear. With a stronger subject and refined technique, permanent transfer may be possible. Another entry, more chilling still. We have determined that twins provide the optimal conditions for our work. The natural resonance between their consciousness creates a bridge that facilitates the transfer. Subject 7 and her twin sister have shown the most promising results to date. For brief periods, we have been able to house both sisters' consciousness within Subject 7 alone. The sister housed in the non-native body reports a sensation of expanding to fill her new vessel. Unfortunately, the strain proved too great, and both subjects expired before we could complete the full protocol. We must find stronger specimens. Dr. Summers believes that these experiments may explain the persistent rumors of Eliza Pendleton being seen in multiple locations simultaneously in the years following her escape. Rather than being mere mistaken identifications or deliberate misdirection, these sightings might reflect something far more disturbing. Eliza Pendleton's continued efforts to perfect the ability to transfer her consciousness between different bodies. If we take these journal entries at face value, Dr. Summers writes, they suggest that the Pendleton sisters, or perhaps just Eliza, if her claim of having been both sisters is true, were engaged in something beyond conventional criminal activity. They were pursuing a form of immortality through the ability to move their consciousness from one body to another. While this sounds like the stuff of fiction, the detailed nature of the experimental notes, combined with the unusual psychological evaluations from the asylum, give us pause. At minimum, Eliza Pendleton believed she had discovered a method of consciousness transfer and was actively working to perfect it. The auction house that opened in the town neighboring the Hollowridge site in 2015 operated for exactly 1 year before closing suddenly. Its proprietor, who went by the name Eleanor Bishop, was described by customers as an elegant elderly woman with remarkable knowledge of antiques and local history. No photographs of Ms. Bishop exist, and she left no forwarding address when she departed. During the year of operation, 3 elderly residents of the area reported break-ins where nothing of obvious value was taken, though all mentioned that old family photographs were among the disturbed items. In 2020, a small auction house opened in Columbia, Missouri, specializing in previously owned treasures with unique histories. Its owner, Elizabeth Finley, bears a striking resemblance to photographs of Eleanor Bishop from the 2015 auction house, despite supposedly being decades younger. Local customers report that Ms. Finley has an uncanny ability to know the history of items brought to her for appraisal, often providing details that the owners themselves were unaware of. Most recently, in 2023, researchers investigating the Pendleton case experienced a series of unusual incidents. Dr. Rachel Summers reported that her office was broken into, though nothing was stolen except her research notes on the Pendleton ciphers. Two graduate students working on the project described being followed by an elegant older woman who would appear near their homes and workplaces but vanish when approached. Most disturbingly, a researcher who had been focusing specifically on the consciousness transfer experiments documented in the Decoded Journal suffered a sudden, unexplained illness that left her in a coma for 3 weeks. Upon awakening, she requested to be removed from the project, refusing to explain why, beyond saying some doors once opened cannot be closed again. The head of the university's history department received an anonymous donation of several 19th-century artifacts shortly after these incidents, including a silver hand mirror with the initials EP engraved on the back. Accompanying the donation was a note that read simply, "History is never truly in the past." Some performances continue long after the audience believes the curtain has fallen. Local law enforcement investigated, but found no evidence identifying the donor. The mirror was determined to match the description of an item stolen from a home in Holleridge in 1889. DNA testing of a hair found adhered to the mirror's handle yielded inconclusive results, with the lab report noting only that the sample contains anomalies that prevent standard analysis. As this investigation continues, one question haunts those familiar with the case. If Eliza Pendleton did indeed discover a method of transferring consciousness, of moving from one body to another, as her journal suggested she was attempting, could she still be alive today, having moved through a succession of hosts over the decades? The possibility seems like the stuff of fiction, a tale told around campfires rather than a subject for serious historical inquiry. Yet the pattern of auction houses appearing and disappearing, always operated by women who bear striking similarities in method if not appearance, continues to this day. Objects disappear from homes only to reappear in these establishments, described as recovered or rediscovered. And in each community where these businesses operate, there are always those who report strange encounters, moments of lost time, unexplained memories, the unsettling feeling of being observed by someone just out of sight. Jessica Reynolds, a customer at the Columbia auction house operated by Elizabeth Finley, described a disturbing experience during an appraisal session in 2022. "I brought in my grandmother's jewelry box, which contained some pieces I was considering selling. Ms. Finley picked up a cameo brooch and began telling me its history, where my grandmother had purchased it, how much she had paid, even that she had worn it to a specific dance in 1952 where she met my grandfather. These were details I didn't know myself. When I asked how she could possibly know these things, she smiled and said, 'I know because Eleanor was there. She sees through my eyes now, just as I will see through another's when this body fails me.' I thought it was just a strange joke until I got home and found a photograph I'd never seen before tucked into the jewelry box. A picture of my grandmother at that dance, wearing that exact brooch, standing next to a young woman who looked remarkably like a younger version of Ms. Finley. Perhaps most chilling are the reports from individuals who have purchased items from these auction houses and later experienced what psychologists term intrusive memories. Vivid recollections of events they never experienced, often featuring twin women in 19th century dress. Some describe dreams in which they find themselves in a dimly lit room, strapped to a chair, while two identical women make preparations around them, speaking in unison about making room and creating space for one more. Dr. Summers, despite her commitment to scientific rigor, admits that the Pendleton case has affected her in unexpected ways. "I began this research as a straightforward historical investigation, but the deeper I've delved into the evidence, the more I've found myself questioning things I once took for granted. I've caught myself checking locks multiple times, being reluctant to attend estate sales or auctions, even avoiding prolonged eye contact with identical twins. There is something about this case that gets under your skin, that makes you question the boundaries we assume exist between minds, between bodies, between one consciousness and another. She continues, "Last week, I found a small silver button on my desk that I'm certain wasn't there when I left the night before. It matches the description of buttons from a dress Eliza Pendleton was known to wear. My office was locked, the building secured. For the first time in my career, I'm considering stepping away from a research project, not because I've exhausted the available evidence, but because I'm not certain I want to uncover what remains hidden." As of this writing, Elizabeth Finley's auction house in Colombia continues to operate, specializing in what she terms objects with memory, pieces that carry the essence of their previous owners. Her client list includes wealthy collectors from across the country, many of whom travel considerable distances to attend her invitation-only evening auctions, events that one attendee described as less like a sale and more like a communion of souls. Local residents report that there is no rational explanation for how it got there. Finley is often seen in the company of a younger woman who bears a striking resemblance to her, though they are never seen side by side, only entering and leaving the same locations at different times. When asked about this companion, Ms. Finley reportedly smiles and says only, "We all need someone to continue our work when we're gone." Auctions are about continuity, ensuring that what is valuable finds its proper place in the world, that nothing truly precious is ever lost forever. Those who have studied the Pendleton case warn against visiting Ms. Finley's establishment or similar auction houses that follow the pattern established in Holleridge so many years ago. They caution particularly against attending the special evening auctions, where the items on offer are said to have unique provenance and particular power. Several individuals who have attended these events report afterward experiencing gaps in their memory, finding themselves in possession of objects they don't recall bidding on, and in some cases, discovering that small personal items have gone missing from their homes. Photographs, locks of hair, handwritten notes, the kind of intimate mementos that connect us to our own histories and identities. A former employee of Ms. Finley's auction house, who asked to remain anonymous, provided this final disturbing account. "I worked there for 3 months before I noticed that Ms. Finley was different on different days. Same person, same face, but different. Some days she was Eliza, precise, cold, calculating. Other days she was Eleanor, warm, persuasive, able to make you feel like the most important person in the room. I started marking on a calendar which version came to work each day, thinking maybe they were twins, playing some kind of game. But then I realized something even stranger. They were never both there on the same day. Never." The employee continued, "The last week I worked there, I came in early and heard Miss Finley in her office, talking to herself. Except it wasn't really to herself. It was like two people having a conversation, but with the same voice. One would speak, then the voice would change slightly, same person but different somehow, and respond. They were discussing someone called the candidate and whether she was ready for the transition. I heard my name mentioned. The next day, Ms. Finley, the Eleanor version, invited me to a special private auction, just the two of us, after hours. Something about her smile made me decline. I quit that afternoon. Sometimes I still dream about what might have happened if I'd said yes, if I'd gone to that private auction. In the dreams, I'm always sitting across from Eleanor, but when I look in the mirror on the wall behind her, I see Eliza's face where mine should be. The Pendleton Sisters auction house in Holleridge, Missouri, may be nothing more than a crumbling foundation now, overgrown with weeds and gradually reclaimed by the forest that surrounds the ghost town. But the legacy of what began there in 1889 continues to echo through the decades. a whispered warning about the dangers of lost things that find their way back into circulation, about the true cost of recovering what was missing, and about the unsettling possibility that some performances never truly end. They merely find new stages, new players, new audiences to terrify. If you find yourself in a small auction house, perhaps run by an elegant woman with piercing blue eyes, who seems to know more about you than she should, who offers to help you recover something you've lost, something precious, something irreplaceable, remember the Pendleton sisters. Remember that some things, once lost, are perhaps better left unfound. And consider carefully whether the price of recovery might be higher than you're willing to pay. For those who dismiss this story as mere legend, consider this final piece of evidence. In the 2 months since researchers began compiling this account, 3 members of the team have reported items missing from their homes: a family photograph, a lock of hair kept in a locket, a journal containing personal thoughts and memories. Each has subsequently received an invitation to a private viewing of recovered items at an address in their city. None have chosen to attend. At least none have reported doing so. And you, watching this video now, have you noticed anything missing lately? Something small, perhaps? Something you might not immediately miss? A photograph from your wallet? A page from your diary? A small keepsake you thought was safely stored away? If you have, you might want to check your mail. The invitation may already be there, elegant handwriting on heavy cream paper, offering you the chance to recover what was lost. The question you must ask yourself is not whether you can afford the price that will be asked, but whether you can afford what might be taken in exchange. Remember, in this world, nothing is truly lost forever. Some things are merely waiting to be recirculated, to find a new owner, to continue their journey through time. And some people, some minds, some souls are doing the same. As you ponder these disturbing possibilities, remember that only through faith in God and the teachings of Jesus Christ can we find true protection from the darkness that lurks in the shadows of history. For it is written in Ephesians 6, verse 11, "Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes." In a world where evil may wear many faces, sometimes even the same face in different guises, faith remains our strongest shield. Lock your doors tonight, check your valuable possessions, and if you receive an invitation to an auction of recovered items, perhaps it would be wiser to let what was lost remain that way. After all, some performances were never meant to be witnessed. Some auctions offer items whose true cost cannot be measured in mere dollars, and some sisters never truly part, even when separated by death itself.